Thanks for tuning in on Zoom. And hopefully you can take one thing from this presentation and hopefully you can share it with one person in your life, whether that be a friend, a sibling, or a colleague, anybody like that. Hopefully somebody young who you can hopefully inspire to become a dues-paying DVOC member in 2026. Now, my talk is in two parts. First, the young birder, and second, the take on birding. So here's a little bit about me before we get started. I've been birding I've been enthralled by nature for all of my life for the past 17 years, but I've really gotten interested since I was 4 years old. Or also, I've been interested in birding for the past 4 years, but I've been interested in birds since I was 4 years old, as you can tell by this lovely image of me as a 4-year-old pointing at something interesting, I'm sure, and holding a very tiny pair of binoculars. Now,
Ethan, you can ignore the
okay.
Bible.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, where did my birding journey start? Well, my first word was Wawa, which I invented that to the first bird-related thing in my life. So it might have just been baby talk, but I like to believe that it was my first goose-related or vocabulary word. Soon after, I was gifted a field guide by, well, technically I stole it from my older brother. Maybe it's a little sibling thing, but I got a field guide and I would just pour through the pages. I would look at every page and be like, that bird is so inspiring. I hope I can see that someday. And soon after, I joined the Trailblazers Birding Club led by Mr. BQ, who is in the room with us right now. And more on him in a little bit. But the Trailblazers Birding Club, which I joined in 2014, a little while ago, really, Mr. Clinton told me the difference between a Carolina chickadee and a black-capped chickadee, which I distinctly remember from 11 years ago. And that really inspired me and it instilled something in me, although it lay dormant in me for a few years until about 2021, where my not very sparky sparkbird, the gray catbird, emerged on my front deck. Now, this slide is a little bit overwhelming, and honestly, I could talk about everything on this slide for about an hour, but we only have an hour today, so we don't want to be here for 2 days, and don't even get me started on the birds. We'll be here until April. But just a little gist, I got started from Merlin, and then I soon discovered eBird, where I started logging my bird observations, a lot of different social media groups, and of course front and center, and not just because I'm presenting to all of you, but because the DVOC has really been a core part of my birding adventure so far. I discovered it somewhere between 2021 and 2023 when I joined the DVOC, and since then I've really met a lot of amazing different individuals in birding, a lot of inspiring individuals who have really pushed me to be the best birder of myself, and that's the DVOC. And there's a bunch of different school-related organizations that I have been a part of, and a lot of birds, of course, along the way. That's just half of it. Here's the second half. The past couple of years. And yet again, the DVOC is front and center with their New Bins for New Birders program, which our high school birding club has gotten involved with, where they very generously donated 15 pairs of binoculars for our club. And that's a shout out to DVOC, great organization, by the way. And yeah, that's a little bit about me and my birding. So that's the young birder. Now here's the take. I'm going to do this in 5 sections. Number 1 is technology, and this is going to be the main portion of it. Stuff about AI, stuff about Merlin, all of that interesting stuff. And then some opportunities and experiences for young birders. Then some school-related activities that people can get involved with.
Because your parents are in the room.
Because my and stuff with the community as well. And then some resources that young birders can use to learn more about the hobby. So first, technology. Now, when we first think of artificial intelligence, what do we think of? Somebody in the room. ChatGPT. I was hoping for that answer. ChatGPT, Google Gemini, even Siri voice assistant, all of these things maybe are increasing in our daily lives. Maybe you use it to keep daily reminders or for inspiration on creating documents or whatever. And Google Gemini, maybe you don't know that name exactly, but maybe you've seen the Google generated overview that is created by Google Gemini. And Siri, when you open up your app, maybe you don't distinctly click the Siri button on your iPhone, but maybe you use the search results when you swipe up. So Siri isn't just artificial intelligence, it's machine learning. And I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but machine learning is a little facet of AI as I understand it. And the way Siri works is just really basically let's give you an example. So you bird every day, you open up the eBird app at 7 a.m. every single morning. Sounds like a lot of us, right? So you open up eBird every morning, and then Siri starts to recognize that you open up eBird at 7 a.m. So then when you swipe up, it might recommend eBird right there in the front slot. So that's how that works. It gives you a lot of different examples, and then the machine starts to learn that. Now, how does that apply to birding, you might be wondering? Well, even Merlin Bird ID has some of those photo ID features and sound ID features. And eBird, you might be wondering, not quite yet, but just in case anyone at Cornell is listening, have a little bit of an idea for eBird, how they can implement this new technology into their data. So let's give you a scenario. Let's say you're at the UPenn Biopond, you're taking a walk, and it's about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, your fingers are frozen, you have gloves on, you don't want to open up your phone, and then all of a sudden, you see a yellow-breasted chat, photo courtesy of Marty Dello. And you're like, this is such a rare bird, so there's two sides of you. One part of you is saying, I gotta log that bird on eBird, it's such a cool bird. But the other part of you are trying to get a better look. Maybe that's not a chat, maybe it's something else. So you're really trying to juggle these two things. Well, what if eBird lets you do both? What if you can still keep your eyes on the bird while you use your voice to activate eBird? You say, hey eBird, add a yellow-breasted chat. And eBird's like, okay, it looks like yellow-breasted chat's marked as rare. Would you add more details? And you're a very diligent birder, so you put the accurate description. You say it's got a yellow breast, so it's fairly large, passerine. It's got the white eye ring, etc. And you got pictures of it. And that's how I think eBird can be used. Or you're from Philly and you say, hey eBird, add that John. You're gonna get more details, and you just say continue. More on Merlin Bird ID. I think a lot of us in the room are familiar with that. The photo ID and sound ID tools are extremely useful for especially newer birders to learn the birds. Of course, it's not completely accurate, as we know, but it's very accessible to a lot of different people across the board. Even the hard of hearing can look at the spectrogram and analyze the different identifications when maybe they can't hear it themselves. And it's very useful for learning birds. I know myself personally learned a lot of the vocalizations by ear by using Merlin. So let's give you another scenario. Who recognizes this place? John Hines National Wildlife Refuge. Let's say it's a bright spring day and you're a brand new birder. And you see this amazing stork fly up from the right side of the screen. And you're like, wow, I wonder what that stork species could be. So you take out your phone, you snap a picture of it, and Merlin identifies it as a great blue heron, and you're like, wow, it's a great blue heron, it's not a stork at all. So that's one example of the way Merlin can be used. Now let's give you another example of how sound ID can be used. You're birding your favorite Delaware County patch, and you're a 2-year-old birder, so you're very suspicious of every single chickadee that you see. You've been hearing reports of different people seeing black-capped chickadees because it's an eruptive species of the year. So you're like, maybe this is the time, maybe it'll show up in my patch. And all of a sudden, a chickadee shows up. And then you see some of the field marks, you see the white wing bars, and you see a little bit of gray on the cheek, though. So it's sort of Carolina, it's sort of black-capped. So you ask Merlin, and it comes up with both. So, but you notice it's vocalizing too. So what do? You pull up Merlin Sound ID, and it comes up as both. So
Because it's learned.
So the point is, computers aren't perfect, and nor are we, and nor are birds. So you do the responsible thing and you give it a slash, Carolina slash black hat. Now that's how you use Merlin, but how does it work? Well, it's powered by this machine learning model known as Merlin Vision, which volunteers contribute to by adding different photos and annotating it. So let's say you have that gray blue heron photo from earlier. A volunteer would go in and draw a little box around that gray blue heron. And then that's called annotation. And after they do that with thousands of times, it trains the model, much like Siri trains the model to know when you're birding every morning. And it trains that to know what a gray blue heron looks like. Sound ID is very similar. You draw a box around the spectrogram, and it's audio annotation, so you draw the boxes around the birds. And they have thousands of audio recordings. And notice on the top right, that's a song sparrow flight call. It's the very minute songs are very important to this model as well. And it takes thousands of these audio clips, and it trains the model in order to get something that is mostly accurate. So the point is it needs a lot of annotations, and a lot of these photos come from the Macaulay library uploaded to eBird. So that's my justification for why most of my 25,000 photos of eBird are poor pictures. That's my justification. But the point is bad photos are important to train this model, especially not just poor quality photos, but the odd angles of birds that you might delete from your SD card are important to upload to the library, because not everyone who goes out into the field and is using Merlin as a tool has a studio camera that is able to take kinds of pictures like those. So it's very important to get poor pictures in addition to the good pictures. Next, I'm going to talk about the bird feeder cameras, sort of related to the photo ID. This has been implemented into our lives in the past couple of years. And some of these have AI features that are powered by Merlin-like AI, artificial intelligence, to identify the species, which is pretty cool. And according to AP News, these smart feeders have gained popularity and sparked interest. And me personally, I was gifted very generously by a family friend a bird feeder camera, which I have put to very good use. And even I would say, passionate yard lister who spends about an hour or two on average in my yard a day, even I noticed some things with the camera that I would never have noticed, especially as I go to school. The red-winged blackbirds from this picture, there are hundreds of them on the ground in the background. And even I saw an eastern phoebe perched on the bird feeder camera. So the point is the camera really portrays the accessibility that's going to increase as we go on. And it brings birds to everyone. Maybe you don't have the best schedule with work or other responsibilities, but you can still watch your camera passively when you're out doing other things. So it brings nature and really makes people more appreciative and cognizant if you have a bird feeder camera. The next thing, one of my favorites, is the nocturnal flight calls. I wonder if I can play this audio. Guess not. Well, nocturnal flight calls, if you don't know, are little tiny nocturnal contact calls that are played by species at night. And the white-throated sparrow, a big misconception is that they only occur at night, but sometimes they make them during the day, especially the white-throated sparrows. Perhaps it's familiar. And you can usually hear it with your ears. You don't need a fancy microphone to appreciate these species. And it's a niche topic in birding at this time. Just, I don't think a lot of people know about it, or maybe it's some weird hours where the birds are most active, but I think it's a really fascinating thing to be able to record the birds and forecast migration that way, and to see how many birds are actually out there. Likewise, Birdcast, which has been implemented into birding in the past few years, has been a very useful tool, if you've heard of it, to use radar to detect birds as little raindrops that move in a certain speed. That's how they calculate it. And they forecast bird migration to see where birds are going and to see how migration is doing in a certain time of year. And maybe you've used this to see when a good day to go birding is in the coming weeks. And Here's a very basic setup of my nocturnal flight calls. I have a bucket and I have a very old cell phone that is plugged into my computer. I'm just running an audio recording and you just listen to everything for the entire night. And if you have any questions about that, I can take them at the end. Now, where does this data go? Well, a lot of it is gone into eBird. I put it in parentheses because there's other citizen science programs like iNaturalist, Canto, things like that. But they all model the status and trends of the species. If you haven't checked out this link before, it's really interesting to get a look at all of the trends of different species. For example, the Bonaparte's gull, because we're in DVSC, that's sort of our mascot bird. And it's a great tool for estimating and forecasting the birds. Anybody can use this website to explore how their populations have changed over time and in the past since eBird has been created, I think. And it gives us more knowledge on the bird populations in general. And you can also see different maps of the birds as they go across the different seasons. So that's where a lot of the eBird data goes. And like that map over there are also personal maps that we can use. Maybe you're familiar with Google Maps if maybe you used it to get here. And that one on the bottom left is Google My Maps, and on the right is ArcGIS. The Pennsylvania Bird Atlas, for one, uses the ArcGIS tool to select different blocks as an interactive thing so that you can have a lot of different details on there. And a lot of different other organizations use ArcGIS to power point counts, things like that. I think the CBC uses it as well. In addition, Google My Maps is a way to personalize your own map. This one is from our big day for the Delco Dowitchers and the Breeding Bird Blitz last year. So there's a ton of different features that you can explore in these maps. And of course, Google Maps. This is a very crazy diagram of all of the saved locations I have nearby. And it's a very useful tool if you haven't played around with the saved locations thing. I have all of the Delco water sources saved in a 60 saved location list on Google Maps that you can get to. And people don't often think about Google Maps as social media. They think of it as a navigation tool. But if you think about the reviews that you can leave on different locations, it's a way to connect different people to birds who might not even be thinking about it. So I, for one, have left a lot of reviews in my local patches, and I greatly encourage you all to maybe of a birding spot that you'd like other people to get into. So here's an example of one of my favorite in Concord Township, Delaware County. And basically what I did was I mentioned a couple of the birds I saw there and then how the hike was. I think this was the first review for that location. And it makes people more aware of the birds that they might not have even considered before. Maybe they're just scrolling past a random review and they see a couple of birds. So they're like, that's interesting. And the point is, this is impactful too, because there's a lot of other things that we do that maybe only nature lovers or birders are looking at, but Google Maps, tons of hikers or even people who are just looking for random locations, they come across these. And out of all the photos, and not very many reviews actually, out of all of those, I've amounted to 3.5 million views on Google Maps just from doing it once or twice a month. So it's certainly something that anyone can get involved with, Google Maps reviews. Of course, there's traditional social media, such as Facebook and Instagram, sharing different posts about birds, getting people thinking about it. And then there's the increase in messaging apps. Perhaps antiquated now are the messenger pigeons and hotline phones in a similar vein, but replaced by those are a bunch of messaging apps. For example, Discord, Telegram, WhatsApp, and GroupMe. And I noticed when the Discord server for Pennsylvania popped up, I noticed that some of our some of our more experienced birders, when they first discovered Discord, they were overwhelmed by the features, which there are a ton of. But some of my peers, my teenager peers, are already very well versed in Discord and other messaging programs. So they sort of got the hang of it a little bit more quickly. So as more teenagers are getting involved in birding, I think that these messaging apps will continue to grow and continue to be a way to share bird information.
Just be honest, Ethan, you're running the PA Birds Discord, okay?
In addition, there are design tools. My favorite one is Canva, and I use this to create a bunch of different designs. And on the left here is one of 4 signs that I designed to place in my local parks, the Birds of Concord Township Park. And on the right is a recent brochure with the same birds that I put and are being implemented. So these signs can be created just on my home laptop in a few hours, and anyone can do something like this. So that's a new technology that could further birding. And in addition to technology, there are the many experiences that young birders can get involved with. There is the Frontiers in Ornithology Youth Symposium. I believe Holly is here tonight on Zoom, and it's a DVOC sponsored event where they sponsored a scholarship for me. I'm very grateful for that. And they have a bunch of different guest speakers where they speak about the opportunities in ornithology, conservation science, and it's a lot of very admirable people in the ornithological community who are successful in their career, and they're inspirational to young birders like me and a lot of other people. If you know someone who could be interested in that, certainly scan the QR code. And the next event will be hosted in Seattle, Washington on October 4th. Next is the Cornell Lab Young Birders event. I was very fortunate to be chosen to attend that one a couple of years ago. The next one is coming up this summer in June 26th through 29th. The application is due in about a month. It is a $650 tuition, but you get to explore the entire campus. You get to know the staff and meet other young birders, so you get to make lifelong connections with young birders. And I, for one, got to learn a lot of the auto recording, a lot of the ins and outs of eBird that I had never considered before. So it was a really amazing experience for me. I greatly encourage any young birder who could be interested to apply just to see. And yeah. Next, we have the school. So in my own school at Garnet Valley High School, I started the birding club there. I think we have a few birding club members tuned into the Zoom tonight. And the way I convince teenagers to join the birding club is to make it seem like it's real life Pokemon, because it really is. So if you have somebody who's very interested in Pokemon, maybe you should nudge them a little bit to birding, because if you don't know what Pokemon is, you got to catch them all. You see a lot of different figures, and you try to see all of them and try to catch them into little Pokeballs. Birding's the same way. You try to get a certain number of birds on your life list, and it's real life too, so it's great that way. That's how I got a lot of people interested, I think, in the high school birding club. We do a lot of different field trips. Debbie Beer, who's here in the audience tonight, led one of those at Hildesea Preserve. I do a lot of bird presentations where I talk about ID events, hotspot highlights, and also a way to get people interested is by a mystery bird every single meeting. I have a bird that they can ID. This is the most recent one. I won't be saying what that is. You'll have to figure that out.
Don't give it away.
So the birding club hopefully encourages people to be cognizant of nature, if not actual birders in the future. And also the DVOC, of course, donated 15 pairs of binoculars I mentioned earlier, and we put them to very good use. So thank you very much for that. I'm also involved with the environmental club at our high school, where we do more of a active approach to conservation. We maintain the environmental trail, which is in front of the high school, and people are more involved that way. They're interested in volunteering and in nature in general. In addition, we have the Bethel Springs Elementary School Trailblazers Club, which Mr. Clinton certainly spearheads. Yep. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you want to say a few words about that?
Well, I first want to say it's great to be sitting and hearing you speak rather than having, having you be the teacher tonight. But yeah, Trailblazers, it's basically like having a bird club like we do with DVOC, except not as many programs. It's just all about getting outside, hiking, seeing birds. And we do all this right on our school's campus on our nature trail, which, it's pretty decent habitat, but we stand to see some pretty cool stuff. Like this past Wednesday, what did we see atop the tree? All the kids got to see?
We saw Merlin. Yep. Just
Pretty awesome.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, thank you.
Thank you. And next we have the community. And first we have the Breeding Bird Blitz for conservation. A lot of different big day activities organized by different organizations. Have a youth category, and the PSO Breeding Bird Blitz for conservation is no exception. We gave a team in the Delaware County, as I mentioned earlier, called the Delco Dowagers, and we raised over $900 for conservation. We saw, 98 birds or something? And that's a way for youth to get involved if you're more into the competitive aspect of birding. And of course, the Birding Club of Delaware County, big shout out to those people, which are increasing their opportunities for youth, I believe, in the future. And there's the website if you're interested in checking it out. Birdtown, Pennsylvania, which I am involved with in the Concord Township Birdtown Committee. We do various tabling events, conservation, and bringing people together through the environment, and we do a lot of youth engagement events. Just this past Valentine's Day, we had a For the Love of Birds event at the Rachel Cole Library, where we had 2 different age groups, most under 12 years old, and Bethel 4-H certainly led that activity, and they had a ton of different activities for the youth to be involved with. The For the Love of Birds event had a lot of organizations that were involved, and one of the activities that was most memorable was a migration activity where they lined up a bunch of different papers where students would go to the next location based on what the paper said. There were even some die to roll to see if you progress to the next paper. For example, you could be eaten by a red-tailed hawk, or you could find an updraft and go to skip 5 steps on migration. So simulate the idea of a bird dog. We also had a Building for the Birds event led by Birdtown, PA, Newland Gristmill, and Valley Forge Audubon. Here's a little rundown of what the high school birding club was involved with. We led a binocular hunt activity where we hit a lot of birds all across the room, cutouts of birds, and students were instructed to use binoculars first, and then they went around the room as a little scavenger hunt, and they tried to identify all the birds. On each of the birds was written a letter, and they had to encode that letter into a worksheet that spelled out Building for the Birds. So that's a way to identify the species. And I even hit a couple of birds within the field guide, so they had to look through that as well. And of course, a very useful birding activity, not really birding, but bird-related activity is bird bingo. And lastly, we have the resources, and this is really all about my website, Berry Birding, shameless plug. If you haven't heard of it, I have a bunch of different resources for young birders that they can get involved with. They're all mentioned up there, but I'll just talk about them really quick. There's birding opportunities like the Frontiers in Ornithology Youth Symposium, summer camps like Hog Island, ABA summer camp, all of those things. And there's also the main core of the website. It's the different blogs and articles that are written by people, by conservation leaders and birders and bird experts. And I think a few people in this meeting have already contributed to that. And they share their experiences to hopefully inspire the next generation of birders. And if anyone's interested afterwards, I can give you my card if you'd like to share your story on my website. So the core of my website is to inspire the next generation of birders through information, entertainment, and conversation. And that's not just the main focus of the website, that's the focus of my presentation as well. So I want you to hopefully learn something from this and share this with somebody else to inspire the next generation. And back to this slide, to share this with one person so we can have 5 new dues-paying EBSC members in 2026. I'd like to give a quick shout out to all of these wonderful people in no order in particular for their immense support in the DVOC. Greg Gordon, Holly Mercury, Debbie Beard, George Armistead, Victoria Sinlinger, Mr. BQ, Mrs. Lockard, Mrs. Kosh, Mr. Kazinjan, and Garnet Valley High School for leading club activities and for their insights. And in the Concord Township Birdtown Committee to Chris Weaver, Steve Jacobs, Jessica Shahan. And in PA Birdtown, Heidi Shiver, BCDC, Christy Alaferio, and John Zygmunt. In PSO, Brian Burns, the AVA, David Brown, Christian Shivey, and Calvin Keys. And I'm sure I missed a few people, don't take it personally. There are just so many very supportive people in the birding community, and I can't thank all of you enough for your insight and support through everything. Yeah, so do we have any questions about any of that?
Ethan, just a wonderful presentation. Just a quick addition, under your technology, you want to throw in YouTube in there because YouTube is a tremendous resource for birding opportunities and identification.
Yeah, this is true. This is very true. On my website as well, I have a link to my YouTube channel, which I post daily clips about birds. But there's also tons of different resources that you mentioned on YouTube as well. Thank you.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, there's Luke has a question. What is the origin of the name berry birding?
Yeah, so as my target audience is sort of the younger members, which inspired like the baby blue color choice, there's also a lot of bears involved in my life. I'm very fond of bears in addition to birds. So I sort of fused the two together in a funny name for my target audience.
Awesome.
About the bear too, before Ethan was Ethan Kang on eBird, he was like berry birding on eBird, and my students in school, when I'd open the eBird hotspot page, there'd be all these other checklists. The only other bird that was going there was berry birding, and it was a picture of a stuffed animal bear with binoculars, and all the kids were like, who is this berry bird? This teddy bear is finding all these birds on a nature trail. There you go.
Yeah, Ethan, you talked about the annotating, volunteers annotate information in Merlin, which is total news to me. I had no idea. So is that something that an average Merlin could do, or do you need special permission from Merlin to be able to do that function, or?
Yeah, so you do need special permission. There's a link on the eBird website that you can use to apply to it.
Okay.
And I gained access from the Young Birders event, so that's the way I was able to. Yeah.
It was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Marty?
Debbie just reminded me of a question. I knew I had a question. I forgot what it was. You didn't mention the star rankings when you talked about that annotation. So that's actually very important and worth pointing out, I think, and probably somebody could explain it better than me. But when you submit photos or audio in eBird, you can rank it yourself. Other people can rank it with stars. And that's actually very important because that helps the machine learning probably in some weighting fashion to decide, is this photo count a lot towards identifying or a little bit? And it is true that bad photos are good, but also they probably want to know they're bad as opposed to good photos. This is in contrast to, I think, not sure, that some people think the stars are for people to say, hey, wow, great job getting that photo. That's not what it's for at all. It's literally the quality of the photo, and you should really rank your own photos regardless of whether.
I guess I'll be taking all my fines. There are guidelines on eBird.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they give you the guidelines. Audio is probably a bit harder in that regard, but.
Gonna do a question from Zoom. Aaron Knight asks, what is the best way for someone to learn how to identify birds in their area?
Great question. So, as I had alluded to earlier, Merlin Bird ID is one of the ways that you can learn by snapping different photos, plugging into the Merlin, and seeing what it comes out. Of course, taking it with a grain of salt. But in addition to one of the more traditional routes is to find a local mentor, maybe some birder that you know in the area that you can talk to and get experience with that way, because there's nothing like learning from the best of the best.
Or bird club.
Or a bird club like a DVSC, definitely. So joining a bird walk with the DVSC.
Pete Dunn had two guidelines for learning birds. The two best ways to learn your birds are to bird with somebody else and to bird alone.
Mhm.
And you can see the value of both of those.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm Harry, great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm curious when you're connecting with people at the bird club, at the schools and so forth, what is it that you think attracts younger people or the people you're encountering to birding or to birds?
That's a great question. The question was, what do you think attracts the younger birders to sort of a bird club like that, if I'm understanding correctly? Well, I think it's just the appeal of nature. Maybe they want to get involved with wildlife and they learn how much the environment is in peril and they want to learn about it that way. Or maybe they see me and they're like, this guy is really passionate about birds, and they're like, maybe that's an interesting thing that it can be involved with. That's my thought.
Thanks.
Do one more from Zoom now. Not a question. Chris said, Ethan, great job. Looking forward to your talk at the store in May.
For context, that is my boss at Wild Birds Unlimited, where I recently got a job. So thank you very much.
You answered my question. It was like one store.
Wild Birds Unlimited, Glen Hill, certainly check it out.
Yeah, no, great talk. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna be carrying big heavy bags.
Debbie has a question.
I just wondered, Ethan, because you showed it, but didn't really talk about it, is what has your experience been with the PA, bird atlas?
Yeah, so for the Pennsylvania Bird Atlas, which is a 5-year-long event to survey the bird populations in Pennsylvania, I've really been in my block, as they call it, the 3 square mile, 9 square mile block, 3x3, where you detect different species. I've really been around in my block and sort of getting access to locations where I might not have gotten access to before, like Concord Country Club, where, yeah, so I've been all around my block and I really love logging the different species there and using the breeding codes to track which species are breeding in a specific locations. I love it.
I could add that Delco has 23, I believe, blocks in the county. And, we have 5 years, as you mentioned, and Ethan, your block is the only one that has already in the first year reached the target percentage for completion. No surprise, but thank you very much,
Yeah,
Ethan.
that's
So please
awesome.
start working on some other blocks.
I think John Hines is, I guess, on the board.
They're close, but you have more.
Yeah.
I know it's but we're gonna lose them. You're going to college, right? Can you talk about your next steps?
Yeah, that's actually what,
Holly
was next.
Let's read that question too, so we can get both. So Holly asks, are you planning a career path doing something with ornithology or conservation science? You sure hope so. You're such a great advocate.
Yeah, so I'm currently a junior in high school, so I'm not 100% sure exactly what I want to do yet, but in college I hope to major in biology and then sort of take it from there, maybe how one path will lead to another. So I'm sort of taking it step by step for now.
Any other questions in the room or anything on Zoom?
I was intrigued by your setup for recording the nocturnal calls. So you're recording them on storing all that recording on your computer and then listening to it later, or what? Yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so sometimes I'm listening live where
Uh-huh.
you have the spectrogram running and you ID it that way. but sometimes I leave it on overnight and then I come back in the morning and I scroll through the recording and then I look at wherever the spectrogram shows a little dot and then I try to identify it. Most of the time you can't, but I try to identify it that way. Yeah.
So is there any automation around that people use at the moment? I mean, you could in theory use Merlin, but.
Yeah, so it's definitely increasing. There's a new app, the program developed by Benjamin Van Dorian from somewhere, and it's called Nighthawk, where it uses it's trained on nocturnal flight or flight calls in particular, and it has some complicated Python things, but you upload your recording and then it processes it that way. So yeah, there is some automation going on. That's
I'm gonna say Python is a program.
I was gonna say, you're not recording the Python. I mean, Marty, remember Scott Whittle, it's also, Tara's also doing it.
Okay.
Any other questions in the room, on Zoom? On people on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions if you have any.
So the Nighthawk issue and the earlier question reminded me like the idea that this data goes in to feed these machine learning algorithms does depend on experts who are taking some amount of the raw data and annotating it. So putting a box around the bird in a photo and then identifying that bird. So somewhere along the way, somebody is putting in the hard work to identify those birds. So I wasn't aware, but it should give you bird lets citizen scientists do that, but there's got to be some vetting, I imagine, or backup multiple people identifying the same thing to make sure they get it right. So, and I would think that would be particularly difficult for night flights and bird songs in general, especially for faint calls. That you got to have somebody train. You know, so the typical way that these things work is that some huge amount of data is input, but they take, let's say, 10 or 20% away. They use the rest of the data, which has been annotated, to train it, and then they apply that to the remaining 10% as a check. That's 10% that's already been annotated. And that's a check against the algorithm. And then the algorithm is basically an input that's like a series of weights that you put in a recording and it spits out an answer. So it doesn't have to train on that. It's got some idea of what an answer should be. But it really depends on how the quality of the data.
Yeah, and it also helps Merlin, if you, I'm getting the reader. If you use Merlin, that you tell it, you know, when it says, this is my bird, you know, whether you do it by using an actual photo or you use the colors and the shape of the bird and things like that. It helps if you tell it that you don't just stop. You say, this is my bird or this is not my bird, because that also helps.
Unless some things change, they don't have an option to say this is not my bird, because when it misidentifies stuff, which can be very obvious to a real user that it's misidentified, there is not an option to say, no, you have it wrong. At least not that I've seen.
Not Merlin audio.
Right.
I'm talking about
I haven't done the photo one.
I'm talking the photo. Yeah, I wasn't talking audio, sorry. I was talking the photo or the step-by-step where you say what size the bird is, what color the bird is it in the tree or is it in a marsh? And you follow those steps. It's a step-by-step IP, you know.
Other
and
users can also, like if you upload an audio of a bird you think is a yellow-breasted chat, you upload that audio, another user listens to it, it's like, that's not a chat. They can flag that for review, and then it goes to like a real person to review that. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not accepted.
Yeah, if you really get into the audio and things like that, which I'm sure there's a whole method to standardize your audio when you're putting it into eBird. And I know we're so used to putting photos in, but you know, it's great you're doing audio as well, because the more good audio that we can get that is added to there will only help for them.
So Ethan kind of touched on the audio recognition part, and might not have been clear to everybody, but even the audio recognition is image recognition. It's not listening to the audio, it's looking at the spectrogram to identify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's looking at the spectrum.
Yeah. So it's still an image recognition. And I guess one thing I will add is iNaturalist sort of works differently from eBird, where you mentioned in eBird, you draw a box around the bird, but iNaturalist just uses the whole photo and tries to get patterns. There's a lot more photos on iNaturalist, so it just uses the whole photo. And there was one time I uploaded a photo. I thought I was uploading a photo of a tree to iNaturalist, and it told me Carolina chickadee. And then I look, and there is a Carolina chickadee in the tree. I did not see that.
It is wild how much it comes up.
Yeah, so iNaturalist uses the research grade observations to train its model.
The chickadees and white oaks
Right.
are.
Yeah. Well, you have to go with the
Great talk,
little ones.
Ethan.
Yeah.
Great talk. But you're so in tune with like all like sort of new things going on in the birding world. Do you have any like predictions, like future technology that we may see at some point?
Predictions for future technology. Well, I think some people were talking about Terra. In here, it's like a passive recording unit, as I understand it, where you put it in your yard and it records a bunch of species that are in your yard, much like the bird feeder camera, but it also records like temperature, humidity, all of those fun stuff. And it also records bird sounds and tries to identify them that way. So I think that will be in the future where we can estimate bird populations without actually being there.
I think another thing that's probably going to happen is the image recognition software is going to get so much more advanced that some of the birds that we cannot identify visually, like some of the flycatchers that you need audio for, Merlin will be able to spot the tiny differences and tell you what it is. So we'll get there.
Also being
skeptical.
able to speak. I think that's like probably a no-brainer, right? Like you talked about.
Oh, yeah.
All right, any other questions? In person, on Zoom? Last call for questions.
I just want to give a shout out to Ethan's parents.
And for driving him around.
I will read this last comment from Melissa. Shout out to Ethan, fabulous student, and I'm honored to be his teacher for 2 classes this year. Learning a lot about bird cover. All right, is that it? All right, thank you so much, Ethan. Dr. Conley.
Thanks again, Ethan.
Thank you, everybody on Zoom.
I know, but I'm saying, that's the thing.